All right, welcome back. Terver Audu, the macroeconomist at Proscia, is joining me right now. Hello, Terver. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, loud and clear. Nancy, good morning.
Hello, Terver. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Okay. How are you? Let's get started. We have quite a lot to discuss, at least in the next few minutes. Let's start with the latest GDP numbers. As a macroeconomist, how did you interpret these numbers yesterday? Do you think there's a vision to this? Because Bayo Onanuga, one of the presidential aides, did say on X yesterday, I don't know if we have that so that we can actually take that on air. Of course, he commented that the president is happy about this. Do you see a vision to this number?
Well, I like to look at the GDP report as your report card when you're in school, the different sectors, they are more like your subjects, which you take while in class. So the agri sector, industry, services, they've had their diverse kind of performance. The Bayo himself has said the president is impressed. Of course, who wouldn't be impressed when their GDP improves? But there are a lot of insights we would need to pick out from this. We've seen that the service sector actually declined. When you look at the service sector, the performance of the service sector declined, and the non-oil sector actually improved. Now, what I would like to point out from here is that the oil sector is more like a sector which I think we're kind of depending a lot on. Okay, so we're kind of depending a lot on the non-oil sector. We're kind of depending a lot on other sectors which might not, we're kind of looking away from other sectors which might not necessarily, give a lot of, which might, of course, give a lot of contribution to this growth. Overall, the growth of the industry sector actually improved to 3.5%, like you mentioned earlier. The service sector declined. The agri sector itself has had a very low growth. So we note that the agri sector, which has, which is one of the largest, which has in fact the largest contribution to GDP, is actually having one of the lowest growth. It's the reason why I mentioned the oil sector is that it goes to show our continuous reliance on the oil sector. Overall, in terms of contribution to GDP, I think you look into the numbers and see that the agri, the trade, the manufacturing sectors, they are all these sectors, they actually declined in terms of contribution to GDP. I think this is not far-fetched from the fact that the overall economy itself has been in a declining phase. I would say inflation being so high, consumer spending being so frustrated. But we also look at from the business segment, we see that the PMI, which the CBN has reported some time back, has been below the 50% threshold. Over the past 18 months, it has been below the 50% threshold. So overall, we desire for the growth to improve, but this is not where we are to be, if the truth must be told. Okay, Nancy, can you hear me? Hello, Nancy. Can you hear me?
We can do it. We can build our country for the sake of the millions of the people. Delivery, yes, we must achieve it.
It could seem impossible because you don't dream big. When you have this mentality of
on too much commercial or private debt so you can service. Any country, if you can service, if you're generating enough revenue from investing that money, fine. But if you're not, you have to be extremely careful because debt relief is not easy.
Hard decisions have been taken and they are required to help us because the central bank can't do it on its own. It has to work very closely with the fiscal side. one without the other is like, that famous adage of clapping with one hand. It won't go anywhere.
The last thing central banks want is the financial system, the tail of the dog, to start wagging the body of the dog, which is the economy itself. They don't want a feedback loop from bad finance to bad economics.
This is Moneyline with Nancy, and I am Nancy Nnaji, where I consistently give you a dose of finance, economy, markets, as well as investment information. All right, welcome back. Terver Audu, the macroeconomist at Approach, is still with me. Hello, Terver. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, Nancy, loud and clear.
Okay. I was saying earlier on that I'm a bit here and there with you when you said GDP numbers are a bit of a scorecard for any president. Okay, I may want to agree with you that the sectors are the subject, as it were. But where do you now leave HDI, for instance, Human Development Index, which, would categorically measure how the livelihoods of people are. Inflation, for example. You're a macroeconomist, you know what I'm talking about, because GDP is about, it's about the total output of a country, and it could be the total output of rich people of a country, as it were, because what we are seeing, you're a macroeconomist now, so it's, that's where I disagree with you a bit on that, and that is actually where we'll come back again to speak about inflation. But I also like the fact that you spoke about agriculture, because when I was looking at the numbers yesterday, in fact, talking about the agri sector, the livestock area in agricultural sector has even been in a recession, I must say so. If you look at those numbers, about 1.7% in the minus for Q2 last year. Forestry is not even, okay, forestry is less than about 3%. For fisheries, we're seeing it a bit here and there. It will be negative this quarter. It will go up. It will be negative. Crop production, of course, was high. We should be doing better than this because we have good soil in this country. So how would you take a look at these areas of concern which have, opened you up to?
Okay, so it's very important to differentiate between these two things. Development, or I would say welfare, and growth. So it's possible for us to have growth, and then that doesn't necessarily translate into development.
Mm-hmm. Which we saw before.
So, exactly.
2013, 2014, 2011,
exactly.
12, yes.
So when we begin to look at issues of the HDI, we begin to look at issues relating to the impact this growth is actually having on, the lives of, citizens of a country. You can't actually talk about the issues of HDI, things like access to education, things like people's ability to afford afford healthy meals. So those are issues that are linked to the HDI, which I believe will come to shortly. But the growth in itself, there's so much that has to be picked out from this growth performance. You've mentioned the agri sector. The agri sector has different components. There's the crop production, which has been the best performing and highest contributing activity to our GDP over the past 8 quarters and more. The other components of the agri sector, which includes the forestry, the livestock, which a ministry was formed for recently, they've been in the negative. The livestock is the worst performing of the agri sector, and I think it's if you check the past 12 quarters backwards, it's been red upon red upon red, mostly red. In fact, in the past 8 quarters, it was positive in I think just once.
Yes.
So it won't be surprising when you see things like your cow, your beef, when you want to buy them, is so expensive. So the issue of agri is something that needs to be looked into. And another constraining factor to that sector is closely linked to the issue of insecurity. Last week alone, we heard that there were about 20 in Niger State, about 20 farmers. I believe there were more who were ambushed. Yesterday in Benue State, there were farmers who were ambushed. This year alone, between January to July, about 5,801 reported killings and over 4,000 abductions. These are issues that are very bothering and concerning. When people cannot go to their farms to actually produce, how would you get output? How would that sector then grow? So it's very concerning. That's why I said the growth is desired. The growth so far might possibly just show the resilience of our economy, and I believe we should just commend that. However, is it where we ought to be? No.
Apparently
So
not.
So we are not yet there when it comes to translating whatever growth we need to put into creating welfare and that impact to the life of people. And truth be told, where we are now in terms of growth, if we can't do better. A lot of sectors are not doing so well. And one last thing I would like to point out here is that when you look at each of the sectors, we don't just operate a mono economy in Nigeria. You could go back and look at the numbers again. We operate mono activity sectors. So if you look at the agri sector, the only activity which performs so well there is the crop production. You go to perhaps the ICT area, you see just the telecoms
Telecoms.
contributing majorly. You look at the transport, what drives that place is the road. Okay, the road. I think this period, the real contribution, the real sector growth has been very commendable. So that's one of the areas I want you to also look at. It's been very commendable, the rate of growth of the real sector contribution, but it's mono activity across sectors. It shows that there is some level of attention that should be given to, extra level of attention that needs to be given to
So other
boosting
sectors.
investment. Yes, to other sectors. If you talk about agri, how is livestock performing? You talk about agri, how is our forestry performing? Don't forget that the paper industry depends on this forestry, which brings the wood. Okay, it depends on this forestry, which could churn out various other liquids and saps which the manufacturing sector use in producing of chemicals and all of that.
Okay.
So a lot needs to be done, and I believe that we are not just in a mono-sector regime, we are in a mono-activity regime, and that has to be given attention if we would optimize growth.
I like that you raised that point. What a way to look at it, because in the different, about 40 sectors that have been surveyed or that have been sampled, you just see one or two sectors or one or two components of those sectors doing well, as it were. Yeah. Even the crop production itself, I'm not sure there's a 2% growth in crop production. But now let's move over to another part of macroeconomy, which influences a lot of people, many Nigerians, the inflation part of it, which has exacerbated the cost of living crisis. Of course, looking at the GDP numbers yesterday, how can you link that? Because if you say, okay, this is a good report, as it were, or for this administration, 3% growth rate for Q2 of last year, Just oppose it against the 33% inflation rate. And what does this number even say for the central bank? Now, I want you to understand my question. A GDP growth rate of 3%, inflation rate of about 33%, as against the MPC that will be held next month. So I wonder what Cardoso and his team will be deliberating at the next. I hope you understand where I'm going to. Yes, you know.
Yeah. Okay. I would go back to the issue of the growth. Okay. If I were personally to rate this report card, I think if your child or a child should move from a C6 to a C4 in his grades, it's an improvement. Okay, it's better than the previous period performance. That's why I wouldn't look at it as a bad one, and it shows the extent of resilience of our economy. It's very, very rare for an economy to have a situation where you have in just H1 the in half a year, your interest rate has been hiked by 800 basis points, yet you were able to muzzle out some growth. That's resilience.
With
And
high
that's why I say
inflation. Yeah.
exactly. So it also shows that we could have done better if the inflation was not there. Because note that inflation has made prices skyrocket, which means that people need to, take out larger chunk of their money to be able to and afford, a lot of things. People's consumption spending and demand, okay, has therefore tended to diminish, and consumption is a very, very important component when you talk about your GDP. Okay, consumption is a very, very important component, and this component being strangled implies that certain sectors are going to suffer. That is why you would see sectors such as trade actually having, less than expected performance. You will see sectors such as manufacturing having less than, expected performance. If you look at performance of Q1 and even Q2 of last year and Q1 of this year, these sectors are sectors that leverage on consumption. And the inflation being there has actually strangled what the true impact that consumption would have had on the overall GDP. You talk about the business space in itself. Just last week, the business confidence in survey report of the CBN came out, and it's just at 0.1%, telling you that there's very, very low level of confidence right now in that businesses have on the macroeconomy. So those are factors that I believe, if we are in place, would have contributed or made us have a better than expected performance. But with this that we have right now, we need to just appreciate the fact that our economy has some level of resilience.
Okay, some level of resilience because, is it some level of resilience because of government policies?
Because we're able to muzzle out some growth.
Now, who muzzled out this growth? Sorry. You understand what I mean? Because if we're talking about resilience, resilience in what area? Because inflation, yes, inflation at a time 40%, food inflation at a time 34%, the headline inflation, food inflation 40%, GDP growth at 3%. Resilience on whose path? Is it out of the sheer resilience of Nigerians themselves? Because government policy has, strangled, stifled growth. You understand what I mean? So, yeah. So if we're talking this resilience, let's give honor to whom honor is due. Is resilience to you and me?
So I believe honor must be given to the service sector. And when I speak of service sector, I speak of areas such as the finance and insurance. You know that I will just give this one example, then move on. The finance and insurance sector, we are under recapitalization right now, and we see the issue of windfall tax coming in, in a period where they need to recapitalize. Okay, this kind of policies create some level of volatility and unpredictability in policies. But then we still see that the finance sector, which is a major player in the service sector, was able to do a very good, make a very good positive, maintain its positive growth. Then I would like to also give honor, since we have to give honor to whom honor is due, we have to give honor to the mining sector. The mining sector actually muzzled out a very, very good level of growth. I think the rail in the transport sector too, I think I would like to call out the rail. Can't remember the particular contribution for the rail sector, but it made a very, very good contribution. These sectors are not conventional sectors that I would say would traditionally rely on, but then these sectors were able to stand out. So overall, the service sector, okay, I would say would need to give honor to the service sector, and that's a major area. However, agric is still not where it has to be
Okay.
because of the bottlenecks there.
Okay, let's talk about inflation a bit because we have about 2 or 3 minutes to wrap up this segment. If we take a look at inflation, of course, you guys at ProShare have done a wonderful job in terms of the graphics, the states, and I also believe that, of course, there are also GDP for states released by the NBS, or a few states, perhaps over 28 states, if I'm not mistaken. Boko Haram attack did not make NBS release for, I think, Borno State and some states some years ago, but I don't know if they would have been released now. So let's take a look at, purchasing power as well as income vis-a-vis minimum wage that has been approved, vis-a-vis even this GDP that we're talking about. What is ProShare's analysis? Of course, you had a macroeconomics economist there. What is your analysis of inflation across Nigerian states moving forward, and perhaps the projection even as we begin to see minimum wage payments? I think it's Adamawa State that has said, Fintiri has said it will begin to pay 70K, Edo State 70K, so very quickly.
Okay, so in terms of inflation, of course, we know it has been on the rise since last year, January. It's been positive, rising up until June this year, where inflation peaked at 34.19%. In July, we had our first decline in inflation to 33.4%. Now, while this was the case, we saw that food inflation was still at over 40%. We saw that, but the mild decline we saw in food inflation from the previous 40.87% to 39% was a major contributor to this July decline in inflation. Overall, I would say that is also a desired trend for the inflation to fall further. That is what is desired.
Okay.
But where we are now, because they say inflation has fallen, so it doesn't imply that things have gotten better yet.
No.
Because inflation is really, really high.
Yeah.
It is now.
Okay.
If you look across the regions in Nigeria, the region with the lowest inflation in Nigeria happens to have inflation at around 32%, which I think should be around the northeast or so, around 32%. If you look at the food inflation itself, food inflation across all regions is still over 35% in Nigeria. You look at the food inflation across states, the regions with the cheapest food in Nigeria, which are the Benue states, the Gombes, those are the regions where food tend to be cheap. And those regions, we have inflation there. The lowest state there, which is, I think there should be Benue on that list. With I think there should be Adamawa. If you look at your states with the lowest.
Yes, you have the northeast and north central states having food
Exactly.
inflation at over 40%.
Exactly. So most of these states, the states with the lowest food inflation in Nigeria have their inflation above 30%. Now, this is what happens. Most of the food supply to the western part of the country comes from the north, an area which food is already very expensive. So that is no surprise where you see that in the southern region of the country has a higher level of inflation
Okay,
overall.
Tiobe, I think
Now,
I
what this
think we may need
implies?
to anchor at this point, really,
Mhm,
because if we
mhm,
continue, we'll continue. You know, so
mhm.
many things to talk about, but we'll anchor at this point. Thank you very much
Mhm.
for joining us and giving us your own
Okay,
perspectives.
okay, thank you very
Thank
much.
you this morning. All right, I've been speaking with Terver Audu, who is the macroeconomist at Proshare. We've been looking at Nigeria's latest GDP numbers and the cost of living crisis I mentioned earlier on for us to look at it because majority of Nigerians are really feeling the heat right now. If GDP is 3%, we help. That's what I've been hearing since yesterday. So we'll try as much as possible to tie it. But that's the much we can take today on the program. We will anchor at this point to take a package. I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. I'll see you all again tomorrow with another edition, another interesting topic, another guest. Bye for now.